On the morning of January 22, 2002, Canadians opened the Globe and Mail and saw a front-page photograph from Kandahar, commandos in the desert walking blindfolded al-Qaeda prisoners toward an aircraft, rifles slung, faces hard. The caption identified the soldiers as Americans. They were not. Their uniforms were forest green, not desert tan, and within a day the Minister of National Defence stood up in Ottawa and admitted the truth the photograph had forced. Those were Canada's own commandos, a unit called Joint Task Force 2, and they were not just in Afghanistan, they were taking prisoners in combat. And that is how an entire country found out its most lethal soldiers were at war, from a miscaptioned photo, by accident. Here is what makes that morning remarkable. The United States hides Delta Force behind cover names and no comments, and the world still gets the books, the interviews, the movies, the leaks. Canada built something colder, a Tier 1 unit wrapped in a national vault so complete that its own Prime Minister's cabinet sat outside it, a unit whose biggest public moment in a decade lasted one photograph and was credited to another country. If you want to understand how deep that vault goes and what has quietly come out of it in 20 years of war, subscribe to War Code, because the loudest thing this unit has ever produced was a single rifle shot, and even then its government spoke exactly 2 sentences. Follow what happened after the photograph, because the scandal was never about the soldiers, it was about who did not know. The capture had happened on January 20th. Canada's military briefed the Minister of Defence, Art Eggleton, within about a day, and then the information simply stopped moving. Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and the federal cabinet learned days later, after the country was already staring at the photo over breakfast, and Parliament erupted. The opposition leader Joe Clark accused the minister of misleading the country by sitting on vital information for 4 days. The minister's own account of when he knew, and what he understood, shifted between briefings, at one point requiring 3 separate military briefings, and the affair nearly consumed him. He survived it by inches and was out of the defense portfolio within months over an unrelated ethics matter, a political career that never recovered from the season the vault cracked open on his watch. And the deployment itself was not even the secret. Ottawa had told Canadians, in a single vague line the previous fall, that its counter-terrorism unit would join the American campaign. What it had not told anyone, including most of the people running the country, was what joining actually meant, that the unit was conducting combat operations and seizing prisoners on the war's front edge. Underneath the political theater sat a genuinely serious question. Canada was debating whether prisoners transferred to American custody would receive Geneva Convention protections, and while that debate ran, Canadian commandos were already transferring prisoners to American custody, and almost nobody empowered to answer for it knew it was happening. Read that structure carefully, because it reveals the doctrine. The secrecy around JTF2 was never a press policy. It was a wall that stood between the unit and the elected government itself. And in January of 2002, Canadians discovered the wall by walking into it. And consider what that photograph interrupted, because it was not year 1 of the unit. By January 2002, JTF2 had existed for almost 9 years, and the Canadian public knew functionally nothing about any of them. The unit's reported history from the 90s, assembled later by journalists and by the military's own sanctioned historians, includes counter-sniper work around besieged Sarajevo, reconnaissance ahead of a planned intervention in Zaire, security tasks in Kosovo, and standing domestic hostage rescue alert through every summit and crisis of the decade. The mission set behind that silence, as the sanctioned histories and Allied records describe it, runs the full Tier 1 spectrum. Hostage rescue and counterterrorism as the founding charter, direct action raids, special reconnaissance, maritime assault work in a country with 3 oceans, and close protection for the highest value Canadians in the worst places. For most of the 90s, the only sustained public reporting on any of it came from a single scrappy Ottawa military magazine, and official Ottawa treated even that as an irritant to be waited out. Reported, in every case, because Ottawa confirmed none of it, then or since. The same pattern holds at home, where the unit's assaulters have reportedly sat on quick reaction alert behind every Canadian summit and spectacle for 3 decades, including the Vancouver Olympics, present in the security architecture and absent from every press release about it. 9 years of operations left a public paper trail thinner than a single American operator's book tour. That was the vault working exactly as built. The vault was designed that way from the first day. JTF2 was born on April 1, 1993, when the Canadian Armed Forces took over the federal counterterrorism mission from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, whose Special Emergency Response Team had carried it since the mid-80s. A police unit stood up in the grim season after the Air India bombing tore 329 people out of the sky and forced Canada to treat terrorism as a national mission rather than a foreign headline. The handover from police to soldiers was itself done quietly, a line item and a transfer of keys, but it changed the country's capabilities fundamentally. A police tactical team can storm a hijacked aircraft in Toronto. It cannot legally hunt the hijacker's organization across a foreign border. Moving the mission to the military gave Canada, for the first time, a deniable expeditionary instrument, and instruments like that get quieter as they get sharper. The military inherited the police unit's compound on Dwyer Hill Road outside Ottawa, a farm country address that still does not look like anything, and stood up a force of just over 100 men drawn mostly from the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry and the Canadian Airborne Regiment. They inherited the training fixtures too, an intercity bus and a decommissioned airliner parked on the grounds so assaulters could rehearse the two worst rooms in counterterrorism, the aisle of a coach and the cabin of a passenger jet. From the outside, nothing about Dwyer Hill announced what lived there. That was the point, and it never changed. Even recruitment happens behind the wall. Postings circulated inside the Canadian forces. Candidates assessed and selected and then simply absent from their old units. Their new address a farm road their families learned not to discuss. When Canada finally expanded its special operations architecture after the September 11th attacks, standing up a full Special Operations Command in 2006 and growing the force around JTF2, the expansion itself was announced in budget lines and press releases that managed to say almost nothing. The unit acquired a parent command, more money, more missions, and precisely zero additional visibility. And the timing of that birth explains the culture better than any policy paper. 2 years after JTF2 stood up, Canada disbanded the Canadian Airborne Regiment outright, the same regiment that had contributed founding members to the new unit, after the Somalia affair put torture photographs from a Canadian deployment on national television. The country's political class emerged from that scandal with a lasting allergy to military spectacle. The United States processed its own dark chapters and kept building myths anyway. Canada decided the safest special operations force was an invisible one. So where Fort Bragg's most famous unit exists in a strange half-light, officially unacknowledged, yet featured in a small library of memoirs, Ottawa chose the whole darkness. No confirmed numbers, no named members, no published budget lines, a government webpage that speaks in generalities, and a standing policy of confirming nothing operational, ever. Even the unit's name is camouflage. Joint Task Force 2 sounds like a temporary staffing committee, a deliberately gray label with no dagger, no lightning bolt, no mythology attached. And that is not an accident of bad branding. The unit's actual motto is Facta non verba, deeds, not words. And Canada enforces the second half, with a rigor no American command has ever matched. There is no Canadian equivalent of the American operator memoir shelf. It is nearly empty, and the rare sanctioned glimpses come through one channel, a colonel historian named Bernard Horn, whose institutional histories were written from inside the wire, on the institution's terms. Canadian journalists who work the beat describe the same ritual, access to information requests that return months later as sheaves of black rectangles, briefings that confirm the unit exists and nothing else, and a command that has answered a generation of questions with the institutional equivalent of a closed door. Delta's cover names get penetrated by American reporters on a schedule. Dwyer Hill's wall, by and large, has simply held. The wall held even through the ugliest accountability fight in modern Canadian politics. In the late 2000s, the question of what happened to detainees Canada transferred in Afghanistan returned with a vengeance. A diplomat's testimony about torture in Afghan custody, committees subpoenaing documents, and a parliament so locked in confrontation over the papers that the government prorogued it rather than hand them over. The country spent years litigating what its soldiers knew and when, and through all of it, the unit that had taken the war's first Canadian prisoners in January 2002 remained structurally outside the fight, its records too classified for the process to touch, its operations discussed, when discussed at all, in closed session. Even Canada's biggest transparency war broke against that particular wall. If the vault interests you more than the noise, you are our kind of viewer. Cadets get every video 24 hours early and a badge in the comments. The link is below. Now for what the vault could not quite contain, because 20 years of war leave marks even on perfect walls. Weeks after the towers fell, Canada quietly sent roughly 40 JTF2 operators to southern Afghanistan, where they were folded into the American-led Task Force K-Bar, a 7-nation special operations coalition built around Navy SEALs and commanded by a SEAL captain named Robert Harward. K-Bar's campaign that winter was the unglamorous foundation of the entire war. Special reconnaissance patrols into the mountain complexes, sensitive site exploitation of abandoned al-Qaeda facilities, direct action raids on cave systems and compounds across southern Afghanistan, work done at altitude, in winter, against an enemy still deciding whether to fight or melt. The Canadians carried their share of it and, by the only public account that matters, more than their share. Almost nothing about what those 40 men did has ever been released by Canada. What we know arrived, characteristically, from the American side. Harward said publicly that the Canadian team was his first choice for any direct action mission, first choice, in a task force that included the Special Operations Forces of 7 nations. And in 2004, the United States awarded Task Force K-Bar the Presidential Unit Citation, one of the highest collective honors it can give, with the Canadian contingent named among the recipients. Sit with the absurdity of that for a second. The most decorated public fact about Canada's secret unit is an American award, announced by Washington, for missions Ottawa still will not describe. Canada's own honors system tells the same story in an even stranger register. The country created a modern pinnacle for battlefield courage, the Star of Military Valor, in the early 90s, and then went more than a decade without awarding a single one, because until Afghanistan, there was officially nothing to award it for. When the Valor decorations finally began to flow, the Special Operations share of them arrived in a format no other country quite uses. On June 28, 2007, the Governor General announced a slate of decorations for the Special Operations Command: 2 Medals of Military Valor, 2 Meritorious Service Crosses, 7 Meritorious Service Medals, Gallantry in Combat, formally recognized at the highest level. The names were withheld. The citations were withheld. Canada pinned medals for battles it will not name on men it will not identify, and the public record of that day is essentially a list of medal counts hanging in a void. The American system redacts details and delays releases, but it builds its heroes a public afterlife. The citations eventually surface, the names attach, the legend compounds. The Canadian system decorates ghosts and files the paperwork inside the vault with everything else. Which brings us to the rifle shot, the single loudest data point in the unit's history. In June of 2017, the Globe and Mail broke a story out of the Mosul campaign. A JTF2 sniper team, working from high ground during the fight against the Islamic State, had killed an ISIS fighter at a measured 3,540 meters, more than 2 miles. The bullet from the Macmillan TAC-50 flew for almost 10 full seconds before it arrived, and the shot broke up an ISIS assault on Iraqi forces in the process. It stands as the longest confirmed kill in the history of warfare, and the lineage it broke tells its own Canadian story. The previous record had belonged to a British sniper, Craig Harrison, at roughly 2.5 kilometers in Helmand. Before him, the mark had belonged to 2 Canadians, regular Army snipers from the Princess Patricias, Rob Furlong and Aaron Perry, who had set their distances in the thin air of the Shahikot Valley during Operation Anaconda in 2002. Those earlier Canadians were named, interviewed, and celebrated because they were conventional soldiers. The man who took the record back for Canada 15 years later was JTF2, and so he does not exist. The shot made headlines on every continent. Canada's Special Operations Command responded to the biggest sniping story ever told with a statement you can read in one breath. The command can confirm that a member of Joint Task Force 2 successfully hit a target at 3,540 meters. That is the entire disclosure. No name, no unit detail, no battle narrative, no interview, then or ever. The American information ecosystem would have produced a book deal, a podcast tour, and a feature film option within 18 months. Ottawa produced 2 sentences and closed the door. In Parliament, the shot briefly forced the old uncomfortable question. Whether a mission Canadians had been told was advise and assist had just set the world record for long-range killing, and the government's answer amounted to the doctrine itself. The mission has not changed. Next question. If you want the purest specimen of the difference between the two national systems, it is that press release and the silence after it. So how does JTF2 actually compare to Delta once you strip the mystery back to what is documented? Not as a rival, and this channel will not manufacture one. The two units train together, fight inside the same coalitions from the Afghan winter of 2001 to the Mosul rooftops of the ISIS war, and solve the same class of problem, and the only public grading either has ever received from a shared battlefield is Harward choosing the Canadians first for direct action, while the entire Seven Flag Task Force watched. That is elite company keeping elite company. The reference standard for the profession remains the unit at Fort Bragg, the force every allied government quietly measures its own against, and nothing in the Canadian record disputes that standard. What Canada built is not a better assault force, it is a better vault. CAG lives behind cover names inside a country that cannot stop talking about it. JTF2 lives behind a farm gate on Dwyer Hill Road inside a country that genuinely does not know what it owns. Two answers to the same question. How do you hide the men who do the unspeakable work? And the Canadian answer is the more absolute of the two. Quiet professionals exist on both sides of that border. Canada just built the quieter ones, and after 30 years, the only reliable way to learn what its quietest soldiers have done is to wait for an ally to thank them in public, or for a photographer to mislabel them, one more time, as Americans. So here is the argument for the comments, and veterans of both systems will feel it personally. Which doctrine actually protects the men better? The American model leaks constantly but builds public reverence, funding, recruiting power, and accountability, a nation that knows its heroes exist. The Canadian model is airtight, no leaks, no myths, no pressure, and also no public constituency, no named heroes, medals in a void, and a cabinet that once learned about its own commandos from a newspaper. Total silence or managed legend. Pick the system you would want guarding your own life and defend it below, because the men inside both vaults never get to vote on it publicly. Official members get the versions that do not survive the public cut, the details and accounts we trim before publish. The door is below.